everybody, and welcome to episode 102 for the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Now, before I make my introductions here, I want to throw this out at you. If you have questions that you want answered, we will answer your questions on the next podcast or any other podcast. Email us at podcast@nationalland.com with your questions, comments, or concerns that we can address on our next podcasts. That also comes down to if you have topics in mind that we should cover, if you just have general questions, like I said, or even if you have guests that you think that we need to talk to. Email us at podcast, singular, not plural, podcast @nationalland.com. Now, let's get on with the introductions here. Today is a really cool episode. We're here with Georgia land real estate agent Steve Chapman and Dr. Yanshu Li of the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Georgia. Dr. Li is an associate professor of forest economics and taxation, and Steve Chapman is a forester with 35 years of experience. This should give you somewhat of an idea as to where the conversation is headed. Now, we're here to discuss probably the most important part of harvesting timber, and it doesn't have anything to do with saw blades or heavy machinery. It has to do with establishing your timber basis. Now, not establishing your timber basis is very common, and it can cause significant errors when it comes to harvesting your timber. This is the kind of episode that honestly makes podcasts really exciting to do in the first place. It's great information, and you don't even have to be a forester or a timber investor to find this stuff fascinating. For me, this is the reason I listen to podcasts anyways, because I love to learn things I never would have been exposed to otherwise. This is a cool episode. Sit back and enjoy. Okay, we are live and recording, and I'm sitting here with two individuals. I have Steve Chapman and I have Dr. Yanshu Li, and I want to run a brief intro because this is a really cool episode. I really have a soft spot for anything that involves timber, mostly just because I grew up. My dad was a logger, and I was just always around it, and it's just I live in the Northwest, so timber is always a thing that I really love talking about on this show, and I don't think that we do it nearly enough. So I'm very excited to have this conversation. So we're here with Steve Chapman. Steve is one of the agents here at National Land Realty. Don't let that dissuade you as far as just saying he's just an agent. Steve has been involved in all kinds of things. He's got 35 years of forestry experience, got a Bachelor of Science in Forest Resources. You've worked with wild quail, you've worked with turkey. Steve, give us a brief intro and sort of your background and how you got here.
Yeah. So I got to National Land Realty. I had worked with the National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative as their forestry coordinator, and Drew Arnold, who is another one of our agents. I know he started with National Land, so I talked with him, and he gave some good rapports and all like that about the company and everybody that he was working with, and got me in touch with Logan Eaton. And so that's how we came about to be with National Land back in 2022. But my background is a forester. I'm retired from the Georgia Forestry Commission. I worked with them 28 years. I have a passion for both private landowners and wildlife, more deer and turkey than anything else. But if you manage for most wildlife, especially quail and turkey, you're going to be managing for a lot of other things. So that's a little bit about my background.
I just I got to throw you a plug in here, Steve. Because you and I met at our national conference, and I think we just talked about bourbon the whole time. And I came away, and you're just such a humble dude. And because you've been on the podcast, this is your third time now, and it was really funny because I just never looked into your background, and I looked into your background. It's like, this guy is one of the most credentialed people we have at National Land. I mean, your background and then your involvement in wildlife. So I got to throw you some props there. You're one of those people that is just you're super humble, and you've done amazing things. So it's really cool to have you on the show, man. I'm glad to have you back here again.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Dr. Yanshu Li, I have to do a very special introduction for Yanshu here, and I asked about how to introduce you because I didn't know if to call you Dr. Li or Yanshu. You said you preferred Yanshu.
Yeah.
So Dr. Yanshu Li is with the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Georgia. She's the associate professor of forest economics and taxation. And just to go through her background a little bit, BS in accounting, master's in agricultural management, another master's in agricultural economics, and a PhD in forest economics. I'm just going to assume that you know your stuff because those you're doing well on the credentials. Also has done research, research interest, her specialization, I guess is the better way to say it, in federal and state forest taxation, economic issues related to forest investment and management. And I'm reading this because there's no way I could memorize all that. Needless to say, Yanshu, amazing credentials and amazing background for this topic. If you could, please introduce us to yourself and how you got here and sort of your journey to where you're working now with the University of Georgia.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you for having me here today. I, by training, I'm a agriculture economist from master degree and then the applied economics in forestry. And about the timber tax stuff, I have to say, I learned a lot from my job. There's no timber taxation, a PhD in timber taxation in this country. So everything we have to learn from our job. I started my job or the formal job back in Texas when 2007, after I received my PhD, I worked as a forest economist at the Texas Forest Service. And in that position, I learned a lot about property tax and started to know some about timber income tax. And I worked in Texas for about 5 years. And then I got a job at the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and I worked as a forest economist over there for 3.5 years, and then I joined the University of Georgia as a timber taxation economist at the Warnell School in 2016. In my current position, my main role is to provide educational assistance to landowners, foresters, accountants about timber tax because it's a very niche area, and a lot of times people are not aware of those special provisions, even for very experienced accountants. So I really enjoyed what I'm doing here. I think, since 2021, I have been co-authoring the tax tips for forest landowners, and also currently I'm updating the handbook handbook on timber tax for forest landowners. Yeah, probably too much. Yeah.
No, it's perfect. And so we brought you in. Steve found you and brought you in to talk with me today, which I'm grateful about. And the conversation that we're having here is establishing basis on your timber. And if you don't know what basis is, I'm going to have Yanshu explain that to you as far as what a basis is, and we're going to take it from there. And the conversation, if you have timber, you definitely know what a basis is. If you don't know what timber is, there's a chance you don't know. So we want to take it from an educational level, from a point of if you have no idea what this is, and then we'll go on through the more advanced things. Steve recently worked on an article with National Land Realty called Why Landowners Should Establish a Timber Basis. You can find that on the National Land Realty blog, and that's where we're kind of basing the conversation today. And it's where Yanshu here is definitely the expert in the field. So I'm gonna hand the mic over, and Yanshu, if you could explain what is a basis, and we're going to take it through the why we should, but there's a lot of other questions along the way. So if you could explain just the basis and sort of how you work with that.
Timber basis, if I have to say one of the most important concepts in timber tax, that is timber basis. basically it represents the book value of your timber property for federal income tax purpose. So it represents your investment in the standing timber for the federal income tax purpose, and it's very important. It's just like when you buy stocks, you need to know the cost basis of your stock, and later on when you sell the stocks, you know how to calculate the profit, and then how to calculate the taxable income, because you can subtract the basis from the revenue, and then only the taxable part is subject to federal income tax. So the timber tax is a very important concept for federal income tax purpose.
And this is for the gains on the. Okay, so it's best to ask you: do I call it a crop? Like, is that how you refer to it in your area?
I wouldn't say it crop, even though right now in our region we do all the reforestation and it's pretty much like a crop. But standing timber normally is treated as a real property for tax purpose. So a lot of times they treat it as a capital assets, and the gain is treated as a capital gain. So it's very careful. I mean, we need to be really careful and not call it crop, because income from crop very likely is treated as ordinary income, and income from standing timber, real property is normally treated as capital gain. And the tax rate is totally different.
Got you. Okay. So when we're talking about establishing basis, basis is the value of the standing timber at the point that you purchased it. Is that, and then how long after purchase do you have to establish basis, or can you do that at any time?
Preferably, you need to establish the basis from day one, from the day you purchase the property. I mean, if you purchase the property, and you need to add all those costs, including the purchase price, any fees, lawyer fees, or consulting forester fees related to the sale. I mean, the purchase, like a surveyor cost or timber cruising costs, and all those. You need to add all those costs as an acquisition cost, and that is your initial basis for timber if you purchase the property. And we know we have different ways to acquire the property, and each different ways, you got different way to figure the initial timber basis.
Is it usually just done through a typical site index, or is that what's sort of the process to establish that?
Normally the fair market value, and
okay.
If you purchase the property, I mean you know the purchase price and the fair market value.
Okay, so do you advise this? Let's say it's somebody just purchasing a property that's heavy in timber, but not necessarily looking to harvest. Should they go ahead, if your property holds trees at all, you should establish a basis? And I see you nodding your head, Steve.
I saw.
I would ask both of you the same question.
Yeah, Steve can answer this question. I think he has.
Which you're on mute.
That's one reason I originally got with Bryce to get the blog put together and get it out there, and then thought about this was, working with private landowners all the time and dealing with especially new landowners that they've got timber and they're wondering what to do. They're potentially looking at doing a timber sale, maybe a thinning and all like that. And, one thing I tell them is you do not want to pay tax on your entire amount of your income that you will get off that sale. So that's why I think it's important to, have a timber cruise done, and to, so they can establish your value of the timber. Now that's not particularly going to be your basis, because you got to divide the whatever between the land and the timber from your initial acquisition cost. But I just mainly trying to save landowners from having to pay Uncle Sam too much federal income tax.
And so let's talk about how this works. And I mean, and I do want to take it from a rudimentary level because I think that Yanshu, you've done a pretty good job explaining it.
No, no.
But as far as establish your basis so that when you sell, you're only taxed on the gain in excess of basis, right? That's fundamentally what
Yeah, right.
and so the reason we're talking about this is it fairly common that people don't do that when they purchase a timber tract?
Exactly. I receive a lot of phone call, or actually on a regular basis. Um, Landowners think about timber basis only when when they had a timber sale, or when they about to have a timber sale. And then I normally ask them, "What's your timber basis?" And then normally the answer is, "What is timber basis?" They really have no idea about timber basis, and I tell them, uh, they can use the timber basis to offset their revenue and then save there on their timber tax, and then starting from there, they have the idea of timber basis. Otherwise, it's just they are not aware of that totally.
So to
And
establish, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And I want to add one more thing. Is yeah, especially after the hurricane or after some natural disaster, a lot of landowners are they have severe timber loss due to the casualty. And the federal income tax provisions they provide some kind of special treatment for timber casualty loss deduction. However, that deduction is limited to your timber basis. So back in 2018, when we had the Hurricane Michael, some landowners in our region, they had really severe timber loss because of that casualty. But because their timber basis is zero, they cannot deduct anything, even if the loss is, or the real economic loss is quite significant. So that's a pity.
So when you say that, is it a matter of do you have to file your basis within a certain amount of time of an event, or are they able to, like you're talking about that somebody's held land for a long time, hurricane comes through, wipes out their timber, are they able to go back, like once their timber's wiped out, can they go back and say, well, this land when I bought it, the timber was worth this much, or is that over? Like you're done, you can't go back and reclaim old basis?
Um, there is no hard requirement about when to document the basis, but we normally recommend landowners to document the basis as soon as possible when they acquire the property, and the record keeping requirement differs for different landowners. For example, if you are just a small landowners having like less than 50 acres of timberland in Georgia, for example, you're probably not required to file your timber basis and all those. You just need to keep track of your record on your timber basis. And there is a very convenient form from IRS. It's a Form T. It has all the sections, help you to organize all the information. And regarding the timber basis, it's kind of like a use it or lose it. So, for example, if you had a timber harvest and you sold the timber, but since you don't have timber basis, you have no idea of your timber basis, you just use zero. And then even if you probably invested something in your timber, but I mean, since you don't have any, you can't substantiate your deductions, so it's kind of you lose the timber basis. That
So the basis have to be reported at the time of when you file your taxes? Is that when you do that, as far as when you harvest the timber and then you go, that's the point when you want to use your basis, and then you have people that have zero on there because they didn't know, and then they lose out heavily.
Yeah, I mean, when you acquire the property, you start to maintain the basis.
Yeah.
And as you own the property and then make changes on the property, then you adjust the basis. And when you sell the timber or in other ways to dispose the timber, then you use up your timber basis and everything reset.
Resets from the time of harvest. Does it reset the whole property, just that section, I'm guessing, right? Or
only that section, only the one you like sold or exchanged or damaged or those.
Okay. So, and then, and that works for the same way for anything, right? Like even a 1031 exchange, or is there some nuance to that if you do a 1031 exchange and you have your basis?
No, the same. Yeah, exactly the same. You need to know your basis, otherwise it's zero, which means you cannot. I mean, the deferred gain will be much larger. And yeah, you mentioned about for example, if you didn't establish the basis at the beginning, then there is a way to retroactively estimate the basis. Basically, you need a professional help, like a professional forester, to help you grow timber back to the date when you receive the property.
I was gonna say, like, you would have to go back to your local area and try to find like the nearest mills and what they were buying timber for at that point in time. Is that kind of how you would do it?
Yeah, yes. I mean, the IRS has some guidelines, like you have to be quite specific to your timber property. It cannot be from the regional price or regional growth, but it's okay actually for professional consulting forester to help you to estimate the growth and the price at the time when you receive the property, and then grow all the timber back to that time point and establish the value and also the volume or the weight.
Okay, so it is one of those, like, if you missed your chance, you can still go back and do this and get yourself like up to date.
Exactly. But there is a catch. I mean,
always a catch.
Yeah, exactly. You need to pay consulting forester to do that, and sometimes it costs money. And if your timber property was acquired like several decades ago, then probably there's no point to. I mean, from the cost benefit perspective, there's no it's no point to establish that basis because the cost is too high. So if that's the case, I normally recommend landowners to just stick with zero, and then next time, starting from day one, like try to keep track of all the timber bases.
I got you. So when somebody wants to do this, you said go back and find a forester to go back in your area. The timber basis, this is more of a question just in general. It's not going to be the same. Just like it's not like there's a state index or a national index of cost basis. Is like this could be a few miles apart difference, right? As far
exactly.
as okay,
exactly. The IRS says you just need to make a reasonable effort to estimate the timber basis specifically for your timber property. So you have to consider your site index, your local market, and everything happened between the day you acquired the property and now.
And this is one I want to throw at you, Steve, since you are the forester in the seat. If you were to go back and help somebody, I don't want to give you acreage or anything. I'll let you kind of give me the idea. But if you were to, like what Yanshu was saying, if you were to go back and try to get the retroactive basis on a timber tract, and they bought it like 20 years ago, what does that cost the landowner to establish the basis by working with a forester? Is it pretty expensive?
It can be, like Yanshu was saying, 20 years. If they've done any harvesting or anything like that, they would have zeroed that basis out anyway, I would imagine. So it's probably cost prohibitive to do something like that. If I was doing it, and if it was a recent thing, if you took what, so like, and I'm thinking of a thinning more than anything else, because it would be easier to do a timber cruise on a thinning. Take what they had, what they harvested, the volumes that they estimated they harvested, go in and do a timber cruise on what's left, and that would give you your estimated total volume. And then you would, depending on, figure your growth rate, and grow that back, say 2-3 years, whatever it is, to come up with the estimated volume at the time of purchase or acquisition. And then, we have here in the South, and I'm not sure how far the market is. We have a product called Timber Mart South that is used where stumpage prices are reported to Timber Mart South, and they do that and keep up with that on a regional basis, a statewide basis, and then even down to, if I'm not mistaken, in Georgia, it's 2 zones, a north and a south region. Yes. So you can use those numbers at that particular time. Say you acquired your land in March of 22, you would go back and acquire a copy of the Timber Mart South at that time through them, and use those prices as a estimate for acquiring your basis. Now, if it was a clear cut, it might be a little bit different. Might end up having some stump cruising to be done, where you have to go out and measure stumps and estimate the heights of the trees by looking at other trees within that local area. So it could be a pretty detailed effort if you had to do it.
And expensive for the landowner, for sure. One of the asked too is, I kind of asked the question, but I just wanted to clarify: is there any size of property in terms of acreage or quantity of timber where you would deem that a basis would not need to be established?
Steve can answer this problem.
Or get the basis on all timber just in case.
I would lean towards that because, I don't want somebody getting in trouble with the IRS. And, I've seen some, it's been a while, but on small tracts, I've seen some pretty nice timber that was fairly old. But there again, it may not even have a basis because, the landowner may have had it a while.
And I wanted to make sure to ask that because, there's a lot of landowners out there that will pick up 3-5 acres and they'll have timber on it, but they don't think anything of it just because they have trees. And then it gets to be 10 years down the road and they realize they can sell that and you can actually collect a profit from the timber on your property, and they'll do that, but then they don't have a basis. So it's one of those, like, you don't think you need it until you do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yanshu, I wanted to ask you about some terminology. So you mentioned before timber accounts and timber basis. I was wondering if you could clarify what is a timber account and how does that compare to a basis?
Basically, timber accounts has 2 entries. One is a timber basis, which is the money side, like how much money the timber worth. And there is another entry that is volume or weight, like what's the volume of the timber on the property, either in MBF or cord or tons. So there's when we talk about timber account, it always has 2 entries. One's the money, one's the volume. So because those 2 numbers are very important for us to calculate the depletion unit, because when we sell timber, we always calculate the depletion units like dollars per ton, dollars per MBF, and then use that depletion unit to calculate the cost of timber, cost of the timber, and then subtract from the revenue to calculate the profit.
So is the basis establishing the
money,
is
the
it
value?
Yeah. Is all of the timber that you have, like my whole land, everything I have is worth this much at the time of purchase? Is that what you're doing, or is it a
Yeah.
cost per, like, so you're like, I cost per board foot, I guess it would be another way to
Uh,
calculate it.
the timber basis is the value of your timber. And normally, when we have different sub accounts for timber, like if you have merchantable timber, if you have plantation, if you have a pre-merchantable sub account. So those the timber account has different sub accounts, and each one has a value and the volume.
So it's a very comprehensive assessment. This is all of your timber in its totality, what it is worth, and as compared to what it would be used for. Like your timber has a lot of knots, it's not going to be board timber, right? Like this stuff like that they're calculating for. It's a really comprehensive thing.
Yeah, exactly. It can go in details like what kind of species or what year it was established and what's like which county you're in. It's all you can divide it into a lot of details, but it has consequences. Mhm.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
and so there's different kinds of basis, right? You have initial basis and you have adjusted basis. I was wondering if you could explain kind of how those work or what those are.
Yeah, the adjust initial basis is the starting point of your timber basis. It's like when you acquire the property, you establish the basis, and then starting from there, um, when you invest more into your timber property, for example, or if you purchase like adjacent property and then you combine them, and in that case you increase your timber basis.
So that would be
Um,
adjusted at that point, right?
yeah, adjust it up. And if you sell timber or if you have a like casualty loss, you reduce the basis, you adjust down, and the final number is adjusted basis.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's just as time
Mhm.
goes on and changes happen, you're adjusting the basis. And just
Yeah.
I was going to say for the anybody listening right now, I just want you to, like, I'm asking questions because Yanshu gave me a sheet that explains these things. Because normally I can kind of bluff my way through a lot of the topics that we cover here because I have like a rudimentary knowledge and I can kind of like scout my way through. This one I'm completely out of my depth. If she hadn't put this
Sorry.
thing together, I would be completely lost. So this is
Uh,
I
I'm
love it.
sorry. I'm sorry, Mac.
Oh, no, no, no. It's like you've helped me a
Uh,
ton, like
uh,
because now I know the questions to ask because it's awesome. But for anybody listening that thinks I know the questions that I'm asking, I really don't. I'm totally just winging it here. So I really appreciate it, Yenshu. Um, I wanted to ask, how do you find the information to get somebody to put a basis on your timber, or how do you
um,
go about it? Like, what's your resources?
yeah, maybe Steve, you want to talk about how to get initial basis?
Um, as far as resources,
Mm.
I know here, and I'm going to talk a lot about Georgia and the Southeast because that's what I know. But all the state forestry agencies usually have a list of consulting foresters that's out there online that's available. Some people specialize in this kind of stuff, establishing a basis. But so uh, that's the first place I would start was with your local state forestry agency or uh, a local forestry landowner organization. We have several of those in Georgia. There's a lot of consultants that attend those meetings and are a part of those. And then, uh, then the consultant will, if it's merchantable timber, they're going to set up and do a timber cruise to get measurements needed to determine that volume.
I was just going
Uh,
to say you just need to get a hold of Steve Chapman across.
well,
Yeah.
no,
I think that's the
Mhm.
actual answer, though. I think that's a thing. Um,
Mhm.
I wanted to ask,
Mhm.
if you are going in and um, trying to do that, are there any kind of special forms that you have to work with to do that, or do you just basically call a forester and say, "Hey, I need to establish my basis"? Is it that easy?
well, as a forester, I would do the timber cruise and come up with the volumes and potentially come up with the dollar values at the time of acquisition or however the property was acquired. And then I'm going to recommend that they find a CPA that is well versed in timber operations or ag operations, because there's a lot of good accountants out there, but there's not a lot of good ones that know timber tax.
The IRS has a very convenient form. It's called Form T for forestry activities.
Yep.
And that form, the first section, acquisition, has a very convenient ways to outline all the properties, all the assets associated with your acquisition or purchase or inheritance. And then you just need to list all the properties, assets, their values and the volumes and all those to help you to set up the basis at the very beginning. So I think that is a very useful form. I mean, for most small landowners, you are not required to file that form, but it's always good to use that form to organize and keep it as a record.
Definitely. And Steve,
Yep.
I got to ask you something, because this phrase has come up between both of you multiple times now, and now I have to ask.
I know what you go.
You have both said timber cruise, and I picture that as something you do with a 6-pack of frosted barley pop, and I guarantee it's not that. So what is a timber cruise, and explain that to anybody listening.
So, but basically, if you do it like it should be, you put random generated plots. You have an idea what, let's say if we're going to do a 10% cruise on 100 acres, and you want to do a 10th acre plot, you're going to end up with 100 plots. And there's programs out there now that can generate you a grid and all like that. We used to have to do it, by hand on a hand drawn map with graphs, so we could figure that out. But so you go to each one of those plots and measure the trees that fall in the plot. You measure diameters and heights, or estimate diameters and heights. And then when you're done with your timber cruise, you would go back and take all those to estimate. You'd want to get it out to where it's 100%. So you would, multiply everything times 10 if you did a 10% cruise. There's other ways to do it. I'm not even going to get into prisms and other things like that, because that's just another more detail. But so once then you would, you'd come up with your total volume, estimated volume.
And what's the difference between this and a site index? Is there, or is there?
Site index, yes, there is a difference.
Okay.
And site index is basically, it's the height of what the codominant and dominant trees would be at whatever age 50, age 25, probably out in your part of the country, you're talking about site index at base age 100 or whatever. I'm not that familiar with the Western forestry and what numbers they use for site index.
No, it's good to know, because so the timber cruise, and this is where, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to try to consolidate it, is you create a grid because you're not going to have uniformity in something like timber. Like if you take timber on a north face versus timber on a south face, are going to live in completely different worlds as far as what their valuation is and how they grow. So you break it up so that you can, and it's the same way you evaluate land in general, right? Like you take,
yes,
so that if it's a large chunk of land, you've got to break it up and evaluate all the sections so then that you can get an overall value at the end. Is that kind of what you're going for?
Yep. Yeah. And, we may have, plantations that are all similar in age, and so forth. So you don't maybe not have to do as many points or as many plots in a plantation like that. You get into natural stands, like you said, you're going to have more variation and so forth. So, um, but yeah, that you're right on that.
Yeah, it's like it's interesting because there's probably some expectation out there. I don't know. In the back of my head, I'm kind of wondering like, okay, does a forester go out and look at 5 trees and be like, they're worth this much? That means all this is worth this much. Like, no, you got to break it up and get your grid and analyze every kind of bit of it and make sure that you understand the whole swath. Like,
yeah, you want to get a good coverage across the entire property.
Got you. And that's that could be a good point on recognizing whether you got a good forester to work with or not. If they go around and don't break it up and don't look at your whole property, then you want to get a new forester.
Yeah.
So Yanshu, I wanted to ask you, what kind of records do you need to keep to make sure that you're up to date?
I think it depends on how you acquire the property. If you purchase the property, you need to like keep all the purchase records, and also at that time probably the county county tax assessor, they have all the information about your land. I think those are very important records to keep. I think I've got to mention the way to determine initial basis differ greatly by how you acquire the property. If your property is acquired by purchase, if you bought the property, then the initial basis is the fair market value of the timber. I mean, assume we only buy timber, but a lot of cases we buy timber and land and like shed, barn and all those. So we need to do allocation. I will talk about that later. But if you acquire the property by inheritance, then the initial basis is fair market value of the property on the date the decedent died. So we normally call it the step up basis, which means compared to the basis in the decedent's hands, the value is higher because you receive the higher timber basis. And if you receive the property by gift, then you pretty much just carry over the basis from the donor. And then, because the timber property, trees always grow, so timber normally is appreciating property. So in that case, you very likely receive a lower timber basis than if you received by inheritance. So we normally call it a carryover basis.
That's the gift basis is a carryover basis.
Yes, right. So we can see, you can see, depending on the way you receive the property, the initial basis is quite different.
So because of how they work, it sounds like the preferred method would be to get it through inheritance rather than a gift, so that because stepping up is going to decrease your taxable liability, right?
Exactly.
And so you want to avoid never accept a gift tree. Is that where we're headed? I don't know. I'm good at the bad jokes today.
Yeah, if I have a timber farm and if I want to give it to my daughter, I probably will put it in my will, and then rather than give her when I still live.
Yeah, and that's really important to know about as far as setting up your succession plan. You could hand that property over to your children or however you want to do that, but that they're going to have an increased liability at that point rather than if you just pass it along on your will. That's a really good note to make.
Exactly.
How often do you need to keep your files updated? So do you need to update your basis on a yearly basis, or how does that whole process work?
It depends really. Like all the answers to income tax questions, it really depends. If normally, if it's for a trade or business that has a lot of timber sales, then you need to update your timber basis very frequently, like every every time when you have a timber sale, you need to update your timber basis to reflect the adjusted basis on your timber. But if you are just a small landowner, you have timber sale one or two timber sale every 3 to 4 years. You don't need to update that timber basis very frequently or on a yearly basis. Yeah, you just need to update it when you have a sale or before a sale, and you don't even need to file that form. You just need to keep it in your record.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so I wanted to ask you too, like you brought up casualty events. Is that the terminology for timber? Yeah. Is it like if it's taken out by a natural disaster kind of thing?
Yeah, it's quite tricky. IRS has different definitions. I mean, we treat like a hurricane, storm, ice storm, fire, insects, disease, everything as a natural disaster. I mean, as a forester, I mean, we treat it like that, but actually IRS has a very narrow definition for casualty loss, disaster that qualify as a casualty. Normally, only the sudden unusual unexpected events qualify as a casualty event, which means like hurricane, storm, fire. Yeah, they see earthquake, but that probably doesn't affect much on timber.
Yeah,
and the drought and the insects and the disease, those are normally not casualty events.
Oh, so you said so which ones are not? The beetles are not?
Yeah, southern pine beetle or mountain pine beetle or disease. What's that? Albor, sorry, Steve, you probably know this. The name of the disease in our region, emerald
ash borer.
Yeah, that has that very big impact on timber in our region. Those are not casualty event or casualty.
So if you lose pine to beetles, you're not qualified for a tax reimbursement.
Yeah, and that's normally the case for landowners holding timber for profit, which means most of the small landowners trade or business. But always an exception. If for example, the southern pine beetle damaged your trees in your yard or backyard, those are we call it decoration, like trees for decoration, residential, those trees that qualify as a casualty loss.
But not if you're selling trees for profit.
Exactly.
That is a really weird loophole.
Exactly. And also drought. Drought. We normally see, as a forester if trees are killed by severe prolonged drought, that's like we say it as a we thought it's as a casualty, but actually it's not in IRS definition because it doesn't meet the suddenness requirement. It has to be sudden event.
It has to be. Is that really? So it has.
Yeah.
Okay. And then fire is considered sudden, so that's casualty event for the trees.
Yes.
Which is like, because out west, our biggest ones are fire and beetles for sure, and then there's a few diseases, but those are like the big ones. I don't know if I should take this as an off the record question. Steve, do those regulations make sense to you?
Not all the time.
Okay, it's just weird that like beetles would not be, just since they're a little slower, but they still kill everything. And I don't know. That's a.
Yeah, it's if the southern pine beetle kills yard trees, that is casualty. But if southern pine beetle kills for-profit trees or timber, those are not casualty.
That just sounds like some politician was irritated at some landowner and just passed a law to spite them or something. It's a weird one to me. I don't know. I got to call that one out.
Because the suddenness requirement, the IRS definition is the event or the loss has to be sudden, which means
Okay.
If a southern pine beetle affect or infested your trees, if it's a yard trees, then immediately that killed your trees and it lost value. But if it's for timber, then even your trees are infested by southern pine beetle, it still has value. You just need to sell the trees as quick as possible and recoup the value. I mean, that means the loss has to be sudden, not the event has to be sudden.
Ah.
I'm sorry, I probably confused you.
No. I did. No, you clarified everything right there. But it's still like I'm still listening to that. Like I can.
Yeah, and the drought is a very interesting natural disaster, and it never. I mean, in most cases, it's not casualty loss. It's for trade or business or landowners holding it for profit. It could be claimed as a non-casualty loss.
And it's it seems like there's a bunch of silly arbitrary differences between it. It's like people behind desks coming up with rules.
Yeah, it's all defined by the IRS regulations and also all those litigation cases over all those years. And we can always find the cases to support, they can always find the cases to support their position.
Right. So you're just going off of old people's arguments and more people sitting behind desks and arguing. It's interesting. I love this stuff. So I want to ask you, in any of these events, whether it is, beetles or the hurricane let's take it by the taxable definition, is that, or not taxable definition, but by the definition of casualty event, which is sudden. If you have a sudden event that removes trees, how do you file it? What do you even do about that? I mean, do you call a State Department and get that on record, or do you do that at time of tax filing? You just need to have a record of the loss. Like, how does somebody say I lost trees and here you go?
We assume it's for casualty loss deduction. For example, like a hurricane or fire. If that happens to your timber, then you need to establish the fair market value of your timber right before the event and right after the event, and then compare the decrease in value. And then that is one of the important numbers. And another important number is our timber basis. And you compare those two numbers, and only the smaller number is eligible to be claimed as a casualty loss for that year.
So you take your original
decrease in,
You take the original basis, and then you take the base. So if you're not keeping your basis updated, you can't really calculate for a casualty event, because you take the original initial basis, and then basis right before event, and then basis right after event.
The basis before and after. It's a fair market value of the timber.
Sorry, I'm using the wrong terminology. Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
No, I confused you. I'm sorry.
So okay, so you take the timber value right before the event and then right after, and then you compare that to the initial basis, and whichever one's lower becomes the thing. So if the timber lost value, you would use the most current. Okay, no, that's very clear actually. And it makes sense.
Steve probably has some real life questions. I mean, stories about the casualty loss deduction.
Well, and I was going to ask you, Yanshu, with a casualty deduction, would it behoove a landowner to take pictures and things like that to have proof? And the reason why I'm asking that, it may be a small wind downburst in a local area that causes something like that. Mac, if you remember Hurricane Michael, and when it came through and the damage it did, it was all on the news about the Air Force base down there in Florida on the Gulf Coast that got pretty much wiped out. And then, but we all knew about it, but there were hundreds and thousands of acres of timberland from the Gulf Coast all the way up through southwest Georgia into south middle Georgia and over towards the Atlantic coast that got damaged. Of course, most of the damage was in Florida and southwest Georgia. So there was, I'd have the value was way up in the millions, if not billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And then so what is the? Oh, sorry, you had a question, Steve. I just jumped in. What was you were asking about, or were you asking? I want to make sure.
Well, the question I asked was, would it behoove a landowner to be able to prove a casualty loss, to take pictures as evidence if something like that happened on a small bay area, not a large area that covered thousands and thousands of acres?
Well, yeah, I think for small landowners, definitely it helps to keep all the record, like take pictures and document the media report about the hurricane or the events. And then very important, if the damage is significant, then hire a professional consulting forester to help you estimate the before and after fair market value. That is very important because the IRS says you just need to make a reasonable effort to estimate the fair market value. But if the casualty loss is significant, then it's always good to have a professional forester to help you to estimate the loss. That helps you substantiate the deduction.
What is the effect on the landowner by reporting the loss? Like, is it an adjusted basis? Is it a reimbursement for losses? Like, what is the actual outcome of reporting a casualty event?
If it's a casualty loss, you can deduct that loss against your income, like any source of income. For example, if you have like salary from university, then you can use that casualty loss to offset your wage income, salary income, and all those. So think about the ordinary income tax rate. That is a good thing.
So it needs to be filed in the same year as the event and done on that year's taxes against your income from that year.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes in prudential declared disaster area, you can even claim the casualty loss 1 year before. Like, for example, if the Hurricane Michael, because it happened in 2018, you can claim a casualty loss deduction for your 2017 tax return because it's a special presidential declared disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Got you. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so, your career right now is working with the taxation of timber. Is the process of establishing basis and this whole part of it, is this probably the single most important piece of owning timber?
Exactly. If I have to say one or two most important concepts in timber taxation, I would say timber basis is one of that.
Excellent. And then, okay, so I have to ask too, I know there's probably a lot more that we're not covering, but we're covering this one topic. Where could somebody find information on other tax strategies, or how to get more educated on things to take advantage of as a timber owner?
There is a very useful website. It's a National Timber Tax website. Just search National Timber Tax website, and I help maintain the content of the website. We try to update information as soon as possible, and we also produce the timber tax tips every year. So if you search tax tips for forest landowners or something like that, it will pop up. And also
I'll put those links. I'll have those links in the show notes.
Okay, great.
When folks watch it, I'll throw those in there.
And
no,
also
very, very useful.
And also the USDA has a publication like they have like for decades. They update every 10, 15 years. It's called federal income tax for forest landowners or something like that. And then it has all the detailed information about timber tax. It's very useful. It's for federal income tax. It's very useful.
Excellent. And I was just looking at the time too. I always try to be respectful of this because I book the things for an hour, and I know that everybody has, as much as I would love to keep you on here for like a couple hours and go into things. But I want to release you of your responsibility of chatting with me for the day. But I wanted to ask you if there was anything that you felt like we haven't discussed so far that would be meaningful in this conversation of timber basis.
Yeah, I think I've got to mention how to allocate the timber basis among different assets. Like if we purchase the property, and a lot of cases we purchase the timberland and other assets. For example, like a shed or a barn and all those. So we need to allocate all the acquisition cost proportionally into different assets. Timber is one of that. And the allocation is based on the fair market value of each asset. So we just allocate the acquisition cost into different assets based on their fair market value.
So you break the money up into buckets based on the specific pieces involved, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because in most of cases, we buy the property, not just the timber. We buy the whole bunch.
Right. No, and that's right, because you did, and I was going to double back on that too, because you brought up the sheds and stuff like that earlier.
Yeah.
That's it. Also good to know. So you break apart, partition off all the independent pieces and price those individually, and then pull them together as the whole. But those don't play a role into the timber basis. They're just the property value.
Yeah, exactly. Especially the land value, because you cannot. The land basis cannot be recovered only if you sell the land. You cannot deduct your land basis from your timber sale. You can only deduct timber basis from timber revenue. So it's really important to separate those from each other.
Very much so. Steve, is there anything that I have missed the boat on?
No, I think you covered it all.
All right. If I got a stamp of approval, I feel good about myself.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Yanshu Li, Steve Chapman, I want to thank you both very, very, very much. I love this conversation. I would love to go into some more timber taxation as well at another time. But for now, thank you both very, very much. This is a very informative episode.
Thanks for doing this. Thanks, Yanshu.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you, Mac. Thank you, Steve.
This concludes episode number 102 for the National Land Realty Podcast, discussing timber basis with Dr. Yanshu Li of the University of Georgia and Georgia land real estate agent Steve Chapman. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com. And remember, get those questions to us. We want to interact with you. It's no fun just talking at people all the time. So email us at podcast@nationalland.com. Even if you just want to tell us we're doing an amazing job, because I have a whole team of folks here that help me out with this. I just get to be the mouthpiece once a week and do the thing. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and I have a very busy team that does a lot of things besides the podcast. So any kind of interaction would be cool, and especially questions. We want to provide value to you, the listener. So like I said, if you have something that you want to know, we'll build it into a topic. And if you have guests that you think we need to talk to, let us know that too. Podcast@nationalland.com. Take care and thank you.